On this episode of China Uncensored, what happens when a Chinese jet and a US spy plane stop being polite and start getting real? Hi, welcome to China Uncensored. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. You know, many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view. And nowhere is that more evident than in the South China Sea.
At least two Chinese J-11 tactical aircraft, those are fighter jets, they carried out what's called an unsafe intercept of a U.S. reconnaissance plane over the South China Sea.
That's according to a U.S. Pentagon official. But according to Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Hong Lei, the U.S. statement was not true. Well, how can that be? Is one side lying? Lying is such a strong term. You see, the U.S. spy plane was flying in international airspace, unless you consider China's point of view, which is that pretty much the entire South China Sea belongs to China. In which case, it's like Hong Lei says.
It must be pointed out that U.S. military planes frequently carry out reconnaissance in Chinese coastal waters, seriously endangering Chinese maritime and air security.
You see, it was the U.S. acting dangerously in Chinese airspace.
At one point, these two Chinese jets, according to this official, came within 50 feet of the American aircraft.
Whoa, 50 feet? Do you realize how dangerous that is? It's like that jerk in the Porsche who tailgates you on the highway, but at airplane speed. But you can't say the Chinese jets flew within 50 feet of the American plane without also accurately saying the U.S. plane flew within 50 feet of the Chinese ones. Here's China Uncensored Force Ghost for more.
So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
This is not a first either. Pretty much the same thing happened back in September 2015, though that unsafe interception was 500 feet, which, while being dangerously unsafe, is still 10 times less unsafe than 50 feet. There was also that spy plane incident in 2001, which just shows how risky flying close can be. Because that time, unfortunately, the Chinese jet actually collided with the US spy plane and the Chinese pilot was killed. And the US plane was forced to make an emergency landing in Hainan. Whose fault was that? Well, China forced the US to apologize before they released the 24 American crew members. That took 11 days. Don't think that's how it should have gone? Well, I guess it's a matter of your point of view. And the point of view of my favorite Chinese state-run media, the Global Times, is that if the US keeps sending in more planes, the odds of another collision will go up. It's the foreign policy equivalent of a windmill attack. I'm just gonna keep swinging my arms, and if you get hit, it's your own fault. Actually, it's the Pentagon's fault. Now, last week's dangerous spy plane encounter happened just a few days ahead of US President Barack Obama making his first trip to Vietnam, where he lifted the US's long-standing embargo on sales of lethal weapons to the communist country.
The United States and Vietnam are united in our support for a regional order, including in the South China Sea.
So China had better watch out, unless, instead, you believe this other thing he said.
The decision to lift the ban was not based on China or any other considerations.
Yeah, I believe that as much as I believe this.
We would gladly see Vietnam develop a normal, friendly, and cooperative relationship with all countries, including the United States.
Anyway, last week's spy plane intercept also occurred just ahead of an international tribunal in The Hague. The Philippines filed a legal challenge over China's claims to the South China Sea. And there's no better way to solve a legal dispute based on international law than international arbitration. Unless from your point of view, arbitration is illegitimate and you ignore its decision. Now, we don't know for certain where last week's encounter actually happened. But the Chinese Foreign Ministry says it was near China's southernmost island province, Hainan. And that's where the Chinese regime bases its growing fleet of nuclear submarines. Those are a big concern for India, and at the beginning of May, the US began talks with India about submarine warfare. I'm sure against no one in particular. Just like selling weapons to Vietnam is about no one in particular. So what's your point of view about last week's incident? Be sure to express it with full vigor in the comment section below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching this episode of China Uncensored.